Are you ready? You're listening to the Kyle Mackey Podcast. Let's get this show started. Do you ever feel trapped by the get shit done mentality? Believing more input will equal more output, only to end up burnt out? What if you could grow your business and still have time for family, hobbies, and self-care, like potentially training for an Ironman? Well, thanks to Dan Martell and the Buyback Principle, we've got a solution. So for those of you who aren't sure who Dan Martell is, he's an entrepreneur, angel investor, and coach who successfully exited 3 technology companies. He's also written multiple books. But the Buyback Principle from the book Buyback Your Time is essentially stating that don't hire to grow your business. Hire to buy back your time. Now, the core problem here is that following this get shit done mentality leads entrepreneurs to hit the pain line where growth stalls due to burnout, self-sabotage, or selling out. But the solution is the systematic process of the Buyback Loop, which is essentially audit, transfer, fill, which allows you to continually upgrade your time and energy. Now, Dan, he had a very chaotic use. He actually even spent time in prison. But eventually he did find order and hope through writing code. Now, his initial hard work ethic led to actually 2 failed companies and even lost his fiance. But eventually it allowed him to seek out a more holistic life solution through the systems that he's created. And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to do a deep dive into Dan Martell's system for reclaiming time. We'll calculate your buyback rate. We'll plot your tasks on a drip matrix, detail the replacement ladder for systematic scaling, and explore the leadership hacks needed to achieve your 10x vision. Now, I know today's episode is going to be primarily based off business aspects, but there's actually a lot in here that you can even apply to your own life, especially if you have a high enough buyback rate from just your day-to-day living. You can actually apply some of these principles in your day-to-day life, which can actually improve that as well. So you don't necessarily need to be a business owner to get the full, even a partial benefit of what he talks about. Yes, it is business focused, but again, if you take some of these strategies and theories and apply them to yourself, even in a work environment, it might make for a much brighter future where you have more control over your most valuable asset, which is your time. So to start off, we're going to go over some mental shifts and prioritizations. And the first thing that he talks about is the drip matrix and your buyback rate. Now, what the drip matrix is essentially a matrix which plots the tasks based off how much money they generate and how much energy they provide or drain. The goal is to spend the majority of the time in the production quadrant, which is essentially where you earn the highest money, but it also gives you the highest energy. Now, how these 4 quadrants work. First off, we have the delegation quadrant. And tasks in this area make little money and they drain your energy. They're the menial tasks such as administrative work, billing, emails, and these should be identified and removed or transferred as quickly as possible. Then you have the replacement quadrant. These categories contain high value tasks that make money, but they drain your energy. These responsibilities could be things such as like selling or marketing or managing teams. And they require more deliberate effort and resources to outsource compared to the delegation tasks. For myself here, I enjoy selling, but managing teams, not so much. So if I was in a situation where, I had a really large team, I might try to get rid of the managing side of things and just work more on the selling side because that's part that I actually enjoy. Then there's the investment quadrant. These activities light you up and they give you energy, but they generate little money immediately or potentially ever. But the time here should be deposited into activities that nourish your soul and your relationships, such as hobbies, family time, and professional development. And then there's that production quadrant. This is the ultimate goal, as tasks here generate lots of money and they light you up. By spending the majority of your time in this quadrant, you achieve true freedom and financial success, which ultimately drives you to be able to use more of that buyback loop. Now, to figure out which things you can start replacing or delegating, it's important to know what your buyback rate, which is your effective hourly rate divided by, your amount of hours. And then anything that's about a quarter of that is what you can essentially get rid of almost instantly. So whether you are in a business and you know how much money the business makes you in profits every year, or you have a job, there might be things in your life that you can easily outsource if you know that buyback rate. So you can essentially take everything you earn on an annual basis, divide it by 8,000. Technically, it's divided by 2,000 and then a quarter of that, so by another 4. But just simply divide it by 8,000. And anything that is under that price point, you should outsource. Because the return on your time and your investment is much greater if you use that money for something else. So for example, if you make, let's say, $200,000 a year, the buyback rate would be $25. Anything that you can outsource for $25, you should do. So if you can have somebody clean, your house for under $25 an hour, you should do it. If you can have somebody cook your meals for under $25 an hour, you should do it. If you can, have somebody answer your emails and stuff like that, you can do it. And I know depending on where you live, like when it comes to like the administrative tasks, so such as emails and calendar stuff, you might think, if I'm only making $100,000 and it's $12.50 an hour is all I can afford. Yes, you might not be able to hire an in-person, but maybe you can hire a virtual assistant who can help you out with those matters in a different country where you don't necessarily have to pay as high a rate. Not saying pay somebody like the absolute bare minimum, but $12.50 in some countries is actually a pretty high pay. Maybe not in the country that I live in. I know here in New Zealand, $12.50 wouldn't get you any employee. 25 is just a little bit above minimum wage. I think it's like 23 something bucks an hour. So you're still going to be on a little bit of a limited pool, but there is people who can do that work. And then again, if you can use those hours that you would have spent doing those tasks on something else that can make you a higher rate of pay, then it's totally worth doing. An example of this is a guy by the name of Stuart. He realized that he was costing his business about $90 an hour for most of the workday because he was spending a lot of his time doing $10 an hour tasks when his hourly value is actually more like $100 an hour. So by, delegating tasks such as administrative work, billing, emails, he then can start making $100 an hour on all the work that he does instead of spending that time on just $10 an hour tasks, which in the long run is going to make his business a whole lot more money, which probably is going to increase that hourly value because he's already not being as effective as he can. And then he can even outsource more stuff down the future. So again, you want to get rid of all those low value tasks. So anything essentially a quarter of your effective hourly rate, get rid of those things. Get other people to take those tasks over so that way you can make more of that high value stuff. That means for example, myself, typically when I'm working in sales, I'm roughly generating $300, $350 an hour. So anything that I can do that is essentially like $75 to $85 an hour, all those tasks I should get rid of and have somebody else do it at $75 to $85, I can probably actually have one or two people, maybe even three, to replace a lot of the tasks that are low money and low energy. I really don't enjoy administrative work. I really don't enjoy emails. So, getting rid of those little bit of tasks, they open up more time for me to bring in more high value items, which hopefully will light me up more. Selling I enjoy. So if I'm spending more time selling, I'm creating more success for myself and just more enjoyment on a day-to-day basis. Now, another concept to cover is the 5-time assassins. So entrepreneurs are susceptible to a chaos addiction because their upbringings often train them to excel in uncertainty. This addiction manifests as one of 5-time assassins, which ultimately sabotage businesses' growths. Now, there's the staller. So stallers, they hesitate on big opportunities. An example from the book is a guy by the name of Sahid. He failed to reply to critical emails for 3 weeks. And by waiting that long, he lost out on an opportunity. So it was actually Dan himself who was reaching out to him, trying to offer him some business opportunities. And he just didn't respond for 3 weeks. But after 3 weeks, Dan lost the belief in him that he could actually succeed in that position, that he was not positioned, but in that work that he was trying to give him. And so he said he wanted to step away at that point from the potential opportunity he was going to give him because he didn't believe that he could deliver as promised. So he was stalling to the point where the opportunity was lost. Then there's the savers, and they hoard money instead of investing in growth. An example of this is another guy by the name of Kyle, and he was risking a multi-million-dollar mastermind he created to simply save $10,000. He was charging $40,000 per member in this mastermind. He had more than enough people in it. It was very successful, but the amount of work and effort that went into the planning for each and every mastermind was starting to kill his joy for what he was doing. But he had an opportunity to outsource this for $10,000. But by not outsourcing it, he was becoming miserable with what he was doing, and he was risking losing the business altogether. So by trying to save and penny pinch those few dollars, it was making him potentially lose everything. Then there's the supervisors, which micromanage employees, preventing them from learning and creating dependency. An example of this is a guy by the name of Daryl. He owned a bike shop, and Dan brings in his bike one day. He's a big mountain biker, and instantly Daryl grabs the bike, fixes up, doesn't explain anything to his employees, and just hands it right back to Dan. He's not really realizing the impact that actually has on his employees because they're not having the opportunity to learn and grow. He's just doing all these tasks, which his employees should be doing, because fixing the bikes is not what's going to make his business grow. It's not what's going to bring him more time. But this supervisor mentality is not allowing for him to gain more of his time back. Then there's the speed demon. They make rapid decisions such as hiring the quickest, the easiest, the cheapest options. An example of this is a guy by the name of Charles. He hired his friend Darwin without reflection, but after 2 months, the guy quits. If he would have done some reflection, he might have realized that his friend always quits after a few months. That's the general habit that Darwin always did. So by not spending the time and looking for a proper hire for that position, costs himself more time in the future. And then there's the self-medicator. So those who turn to vices to reward their success or to escape failure or pain. And this is Dan himself. He, I think, has been sober now for like 10 or 12 years, but he used to drink a lot. And he once celebrated a dream project that he got by going out and enjoying some sake. And in the end, the next morning, he felt so horrible, he had to call in sick to work on that project for that day. They ended up losing the project. And so the success that he had, he killed by, partying a little too hard. So now the reason why it's important to know about these 5 assassins is because each one steals your time. I've sort of went over it real quick, but the staller, you miss out on these opportunities, which then require you to put in more time to get new opportunities. But if you just make the decision to take these opportunities, you grow quicker. The saver, by not spending that $10,000 to have somebody create the programs for you, you're spending all that time and effort to keep building these things, which is, again, taking more and more of your time. But if you outsource it, then you can spend your time on something else that lights you up even more, brings you more energy, probably brings you in more business. The supervisor, by not using those times where he was fixing the bike to train his staff, it just means he's probably going to have to train them more, or their staff is never going to be good enough at what they need to do to actually fix all the bikes that come into the shop. The speed demon, by just hiring the quickest, the cheapest, the easiest, you're probably spending more time in training and all these other areas. I know myself from having business, training is a really time-consuming task. It's always better to keep an employee longer than to constantly be finding new ones, especially when you can get good ones. So to spend time to get the top-notch employees you can get will save you time in the long run, because you won't have to keep on training over and over and over and over. And then self-medicator. If you're partying so hard that it's making you miss out on days. I know myself, I don't barely drink anymore, because when I do, I often have like a 2-day hangover. And for me to have one night, but then I lose 2 days of work or potential revenue, even if it is, on a Saturday night, and it was just one day. I don't want to lose my Sunday, which is my one day to fully relax and enjoy because of a night out of drinking. But if I lose 2 days, then I even lose a day of, possible income making, and that's just not worth it. So when you have these assassins and they're stealing your time, ultimately what you're trying to do here is create yourself more of that valuable time, that whether it's creating you money or creating you energy. And if any of these are taken away, you got to get rid of those things. Now that we have an understanding of what the drip matrix is and the buyback principle and the things that are stealing your time, we need to now have a system for transferring those low value tasks to allow us to focus on those high value tasks, whether it's money or energy. And the first principle that Dan talks about is the replacement ladder, which is about systematic scaling. The replacement ladder provides a tested path for moving responsibilities out of the replacement quadrant. So high money, but drains energy. And the ladder is something that you want to climb in sequence. So the first thing always is administrative. Then there's delivery. Then there's marketing, sales, and leadership. And again, the first focus should always be hiring an administrative assistant to handle inbox and calendar. Dan goes into quite a bit of detail about this, and he has systems in place. If you read the book, also give the link at the very end of it. But if you check out his online resource, he has systems in place to really easily outsource the inbox and the calendar. But by eliminating these smaller tasks, again, it allows you just to keep on focusing on the bigger things. But you want to go little bit by little bit. You don't want to just give away the leadership first and be stuck on administrative. Then you're just an employee in your own company. And, I've sometimes felt like that, where I sometimes feel like I'm just an employee in my own company, and that's not what you're trying to do. You're trying to create a business that can grow and become a much bigger success. And in order to do that, you need to be focusing on the more important things. So get rid of the administrative, the delivery, the marketing, the sales, then the leadership, all in that order. An example of this is Andy Warhol, successful painter or artist. He replaced himself in the delivery of his art using his studio, the factory, and assistants to create an assembly line effect, freeing him to focus on commercialization. Most artists don't do this. They just focus on the art themselves. But he's been able to be so successful because he's created a system to help him with the delivery of his art to his audience. Now, how do you get rid of these different tasks? And this is where he comes back with a really cool system. So his playbooks and cloning yourself. And obviously it's getting people to take over tasks seems like a daunting thing to do. Coming up with these playbooks, coming up with training manuals, all that stuff. It does seem like it takes time, but by using the system that he created, it speeds up that whole process. So documented playbooks, standard operating procedures are key because they have unlimited predictability, and that is more valuable than intermittent quality. They allow you to clone your procedures and scale quickly, such as like with McDonald's when they use their speedy service system. It's better to be delivering 80% quality every single time than to be, 100% quality 20% of the time. It can't be all over the place. You can't have a couple customers happy, but most unhappy. It's going to kill your business. But, a business where all your employees are giving you, all your customers are giving you 4 or 4.5 stars. Now that's still a pretty great business. You're still going to get tons of business than to have, 20% of your reviews 5 stars and then 80% 1 stars. I'd go for that 4.5 every day. And that's what you want to try to do by making things more standardized. And so the system that Dan came up with is what he calls the camcorder method, which is by recording yourself performing a task optimally 3 times. You don't want to just do it once because there is going to be some variance from time to time. But then at the same time, narrating what it is that you're doing, all the little things, so that way people can pick up on what's important. But here's where it gets really cool, is that he also has the 4 C's. And so it's the camcorder method, the course, the cadence, and the checklist. And ideally, you have the trainees create the playbook after watching the videos, which allows you to know that they have an understanding of what it is, what they have to do. So they watch the videos, they create the playbook, you review the playbook, and then if it seems like they got all the main bits from it, you give it the thumbs up. If they feel like it's missing, you can ask them to rewatch it. Or if it's just like some key details that maybe you didn't do a good job of explaining in the videos, you can throw in those bits. And then you have their playbook that they've created as part of their training. And you can use that for future things to reference if it's good or not, and go from there. Also, now you have a bunch of AI tools, which if you were to create the video, this book's a little bit before all the AI tools now, but you could simply throw your video up and have it create a playbook, which you can use to compare to. Probably will do better than what the employee will do based off their observations. But the whole process here is the camcorder method, involves recording yourself performing the task, again, optimally 3 times, talking through the nuances, creating the training videos that form the foundation of the playbook. And then the course, this is the bullet list of all the high-level steps for each task in the playbook. So, for example, like clock in, turn on the espresso machine. Then there's the cadence. So record the frequency. So whether this task is done daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually. So that way they know when the tasks in the playbook should actually be completed. And then there's the checklist. These are the non-negotiables, the high-level items that must be completed every time a task is executed. Did you pull in all the reports and ensure they were easily readable? So by doing this, you make it that everybody is always going to know how to do the tasks, but they're actually going to go through this method in a way where they truly understand what's going on because they're creating the playbook, which I can't remember who may have said this, but one of the best ways to learn is to teach. And by creating that playbook after watching these videos, you're essentially teaching others. You're going to give that to your manager, or if it's the first time that you're creating this playbook, to yourself. They're giving it to you so you can review it. But if they have all the information in there, clearly they've learned it and they could teach it to somebody else. And so it's a system that just keeps on repeating. So use these videos, which allow them to come up with their own playbook in the process. They then can teach other people. This actually goes back to an episode which I did with Buyback. I don't know if we talked about it in the podcast, but it was something around there where, when I've trained people in the past, sometimes I give them like the pitch. But one of the better things to do is just teach them how to pitch and then make them create their own pitch and then bring that to you. Because when you give them everything, sometimes they don't actually comprehend it as well. But if you just teach them how to do the process or show them how to do the process and then tell them to come up with it themselves, again, they learn better and they're able to actually do what it is that you're trying to get them to do at a much higher quality. Next off is how to master your time and leadership. So he goes over something called the perfect week and batching. A perfect week is a proactive plan that eliminates buffer time between tasks and reduce costly context switching, which enables you to reach a flow state. I'm pretty bad at this, so this is definitely somewhere where I could definitely improve. But by actually planning out your week, you can make it that you have much more effective flow from one activity to the next and not having like that 15, 30-minute buffer in between different activities. So, if you have your morning meeting with, let's say you have an assistant, and then you go to a sales call, and then you go to interview, and then you do some coaching clients, and then you do some sales, and you just keep on switching through that on a daily basis, you're always going to be losing time from one activity to the next. But if you batch things together, similar tasks, all your sales calls on a Tuesday afternoon, your content writing one day of the month, you ultimately are going to optimize your energy so that way you can stay in state working on that one task and just boom, 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 everything you need to in that small area, and not waste those 15 to 30 minutes switching from one task to another. There's very few people I know who can just switch from one task to another without any downtime. There usually is a little bit. But again, if you can chunk things together so that way you're not switching as much, you're going to utilize your time more efficiently. And so by planning your week, putting in your priorities first, such as your workouts, your deep work, your family time, like the big rocks, you ensure you don't miss them. A good analogy they had here is like if you have a bowl and you fill it with a bunch of pebbles and then you try to add in the big rocks, it's really hard to do. But if you put in the big rocks, then you could put in little pebbles, and then you can actually still fit in more. You can fit in sand, and then you can fit in even more. You can fit in water. So as long as you put the big things in first and then you work the other things around it, you actually can fill in a whole lot more and be more effective with your time overall. So you want to plan out the week, get the big stuff in, then fill that with the smaller stuff around it, and then even the smaller stuff and smaller stuff around that. Make sure you get in the most important stuff. So if there's certain elements in your business which are the key priorities, whether it's making content, whether it's doing your coaching calls, whether it's doing your sales calls, whatever it is, make those the priorities, the important stuff, then put in the less important stuff around that, and then just squeeze in the things that are the least important at the last bit. Then Dan talks about some essential time hacks, and they're just simple rules to essentially empower staff and prevent upward delegation. One of his rules that he follows is the $50 magic pill. And essentially it's giving employees a specific dollar amount that they can spend to fix problems without your permission. When I had a manager last year working with me, I essentially said she could spend $500 a month. If it was under $500 a month, don't have to ask me. You can tell me about it if you want. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to see it anyways because all the transactions come through to my phone, but I can just simply see it. If it seems something absurd, obviously I'll be aware. But giving them that authority to just make these decisions, if they think it's going to solve a problem, just let them do it. If it's $50 is the magic number, depending on where your business is at, $50 isn't going to break the bank. For me, $500 wasn't going to break the bank. Even if it was a bad $500 spend, whatever. For Dan, for him, it's only like he has different thresholds for different type positions, but ultimately the ones that he wants to hear about is only things that are above $10,000. Again, depending on the type of business you're in, the type of spend that it is, by just allowing people and giving them permission, it makes them feel empowered in the first place that they have the authority to just make these decisions and to spend to fix situations. So if you have that ability, just put that magic pill out there. Say, if it's under this, just spend it. Don't worry about it. Then there's the definition of done. Provide clear instructions for every task that include facts, feelings, and functionality. Essentially, make it so there's no obscurity of when a task is actually done. An example of this, Dan asked somebody to put a whiteboard up in his office. So the definition of done is the task is done when the whiteboard is hanging on the wall in my office. There are 4 colored markers, red, green, blue, and black, and there's a dry erase marker handy. So when everything's all said and done, he can start using that whiteboard right away. That's his definition of done. And then there's the rule, the 1-3-1 rule. When staff bring a problem, they must define 1 problem, 3 variable solutions, and make the 1 recommendation on which they should choose. I love this. I've never done this before, but I think it's an extremely empowering solution for your staff. It allows them to come up with their own solutions and even essentially say which one they think is the best. Obviously, if you really disagree, you can suggest maybe they use one of the other solutions. But generally speaking, if they're spending the time to think up 3 possible solutions and then they're going through that and saying, I think this is the best one, the odds are they know what they're talking about. The odds are they're more of an expert in that area. Again, your job is not to focus on these little tasks, to focus on these little problems. You can't solve every single problem in a business, but if you can empower other people to come up with those solutions, then that's a pretty cool thing. But this allows them to not just think of 1. They need to come up with 3, which will probably allow them to realize which one's the best one. And lastly is the transformational leadership. Now, leaders must transition from a transactional management where they tell, check, next, to transformational leadership, which is outcome, measure, coach. This means that stating the desired outcome, not the process. So an example of this is Dan gives a guy by the name of James. He says, you need to hit $100,000 in sales by the end of next quarter. He doesn't say exactly how to do it. He just says, this is what you need to hit. And I think the example in this is a restaurant. So he could have just said, you just need to increase all the menu items by 10%. And yeah, maybe it would have got him up to 100,000. But by saying that, he was able to get a little bit more creative in it and actually create even more business. He kept the menu items the same, which keeps the regular customers happy, but then he created a seasonal menu, which had a little bit higher price, but it also got a lot of people coming back because they got to try new foods that they wouldn't normally have. And then they're happy to spend these higher amounts of money because they're not used to them on the menu in the first place. But overall, it increased those sales by what they needed without saying exactly how to do it, and probably made happier customers in the end, which is always a great thing. And then when you are working with your staff or essentially coaching them using a coach framework, which Dan describes as essentially COACH, and the CO is for your core issue. The A is for your actual story. And then the CH is the change that needs to be implemented. And essentially, it's using actual stories and actual real examples to sort of get the staff thinking. And then based off that, it allows them to think about what the changes that needs to be implemented, not giving them necessarily the solution, but giving them the opportunity to think about what they could change to create lasting results. So again, not telling them, using your past experiences to get them thinking differently to create the desired result. So obviously, the whole point here is to buy back your time. But what are you buying back your time for? Ultimately, it's to create a better vision and life in the future. Dan wants people to dream big. And so he's created something called the 10X vision. And so it's once your time is bought back, you must fill it with a bold, meaningful 10X vision, something huge and clear that inspires you. But the necessity of a big dream drives innovation and simplifies decision making. It's easier to go after 10X than just going after 2X. If you can live a 10 times better life, that's pretty sweet. If you can live a 2 times better life, that might not be enough to really wake you up and drive you in the morning. And you ultimately want to have a vision, not just in one area, but he suggests 4. And so you want to have a vision of what your team will look like. You want to have a vision of what a singular business will look like. You want to have a vision of what your empire will look like. And then you want to have a vision of your lifestyle. So an example of this is Lane Merrifield. He was actually the creator of Club Penguin, which was like an online kid community. It was massive. He wanted to make sure it was safe, and eventually sold it to business, to Disney for $350 million. But he had this dream of what he wanted Club Penguin to be, which was ultimately a safe online community for children. And that's what he went after. But he had this very clear vision of what he wanted. And so having these visions in all your different areas, what you want your team to be like. Oh, I want to have a team of 20 people, which is built up of these different positions. This singular business, I want us to reach this set revenue where we're helping this amount of people. Your empire. I want to have these different businesses which are ultimately accomplishing this overall goal. My lifestyle. I want to have 4 homes in different parts of the world where I can visit, my parents, my partner's parents, our favorite travel destination, and where our business does most of their business, having different places in all these. So having a clear vision in all these different areas will help motivate you and light you up to keep buying back that time. And also realizing that the buyback principle is an ongoing philosophy to constantly trade up your life. By applying it, you move from a level 1 trader where you're an employee trading time for money to a level 2 trader where you're an entrepreneur trading money for time to a level 3 trader where you're an empire builder trading your money for more money. This principle must extend to your personal life tasks, also the little things as well, allowing you to build a life you don't need a vacation from. And this is where everybody can apply this. Again, if you're making enough money, there's always going to be tasks in your life that you can outsource. The easy ones that come to mind are cleaning, cooking, laundry, emails, things like that. If you can outsource that stuff, that's going to make your life a whole lot more enjoyable because you can focus on those bigger things that make your life more exciting. And one cool comment, I don't have this here in my notes, but I know a lot of times people have an issue with outsourcing these things. But the way that Dan looks at it is by not outsourcing these things, you're actually robbing somebody of potential money that they can earn. If you don't love doing a task, and some people love cleaning, some people actually do. Some people who have cleaning businesses think it's the greatest thing in the world. They feel at peace and comfortable when they're doing these things. But by not giving them that job, you're robbing somebody else of the opportunity to earn money that they might be without a job. So you should never feel bad about giving somebody work, especially if you're paying them a fair price. So if you can outsource these jobs to other people, and it means that you free up more time to do the things that you're really good at, that's an important thing to do. One example that Dan talks about is eventually he hires a house manager to handle personal administrative like laundry, paying bills, car maintenance, delivering daily protein shakes, ultimately freeing up his personal time so he can spend more time with the people he loves. Again, he's giving somebody a job. They're earning money. They're giving a life. Hopefully they're doing things that they enjoy too, but they're things that they're actually good at. And so anytime you can outsource the things that are not allowing you to maximize the ability to buy back more of your time, you need to start outsourcing those. So ultimately what you need to realize is that this is an infinite game. You need to continually apply the audit, transfer, fill methodology so that way you can gain more time and you can invest in what you love. The more money you make allows you to buy back even more time. And I know everybody has this goal of retiring at 65, but that shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be to be continuously creating and living fully, because if you retire, you must quit doing what you love. So create a life, a business that you love and that you want to do until the day that you die. That's always been my mentality. I don't really understand retiring. I definitely want to be in a financial situation where if I needed to retire because of health reasons or whatever it might be, that I have that financial security to be able to do so. But retiring at 65 does not sound fun to me at all. And I want to do exactly this. I want to create a life that I'm living fully and that I want to just keep living until the day that I die. I don't want to quit. And I think that's the most beautiful thing about this book. It's about creating a better life and maximizing the time that you have. One of the things that I value the most in life is my time. And if there's a way to make more of it or to free up more of it, because you can't make more time. That's the one thing that we can't get more of. But if there's a way to free up more of it, well, that's a pretty amazing thing. So if there were a few things that you could take away from today's episode, obviously the buyback principle. Don't hire to grow your business. Hire to buy back your time. You want to prioritize using the buyback loop, the audit, transfer, fill, to clear tasks, starting with the delegation quadrant. The first hire you want to do is an administrative assistant. It's non-negotiable for managing your calendar in your inbox. Dan gives even tools such as like the email GPS to make it all work quite easily. But that is the number one thing you want to get rid of, is all your administrative tasks. Then you want to scale with predictability, and the way that you do that is by building playbooks using the camcorder method. Record yourself 3 times to clone the process and the knowledge. And then you have your new staff create the playbooks. And then empower others through practice transformational leadership by setting outcomes, not steps, and stop being upward delegation by using rules such as like the 1-3-1 rule. So if there was something that you could do today to, start implementing this right away, what I would recommend is identify one low value task you hate performing, calculate your buyback rate, and see if you can afford to transfer it immediately. And if you can, then do it. And then immediately fill that reclaimed time with high value tasks that align with your 10x vision. Don't just transfer it and then sit on the couch. Transfer it and then use that time to make yourself more money. So if you want to read the book, you can check it out. It's Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. You can also check out buybackyourtime.com/resources for some of his downloadable templates, such as his time and energy audit, his playbook examples, the perfect week builder. He's got a lot of stuff on there, so feel free to check that out. But hopefully you got a lot of value out of today's episode. I think this episode is very valuable to anybody, not just business owners. But buying back your time so you can get more of the most valuable resource you have to do things that really light you up, bring you more money, bring you more energy. If you can do that, that's pretty remarkable. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I look forward to having you all back here in 2 weeks' time.
Thanks for listening. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.